That should wake you up.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I think on behalf also of my colleagues here, I would like to thank you, Ms. Van Vera and your colleagues of TMA for hosting us at this meeting, for giving us the privilege to be back in Thailand, and to try to contribute significantly to raise your general level of confusion on competitiveness. We are going to look at the future. We are going to do it at redesigning the future with two experts from the academic world and also from the world of practice, although sometimes the world of academics is also quite practical. And we are going to do it on the ground of a kind of discussion we are going to have together. I mean, basically, the way we are going to run it is according to what is the first basic principle of competitiveness, which is that you do not compete with dinner. So we are going to try to finish in time, and we are going to try to make it as to the point as possible. And this is the reason why, as a structure for our discussion, we are going to have each of us about 10 minutes maximum, for a message. And my colleagues have agreed that if they go beyond those 10 minutes, I will interrupt them. Okay? However, we will try to have a very open discussion, and we hope that you will contribute to this discussion. You will have the possibility to send some of the questions electronically, and I have here an iPad where I will receive those questions, and we can really try to answer them. The second thing which is important is that you have also the possibility to ask questions directly. You just have to raise your hand, and then somebody will come to you with a microphone. And I would simply ask you perhaps to state your name and function again so that my colleagues who may not have met you before know to whom they should address themselves. So this is going to be a little bit the structure of this evening. In the discussion, as you know, the overall theme is going to be about redesigning the future for all of us, and I think this is a very big challenge. Within the discussion, we felt that there are 6 basic elements we would like to address, even if you should feel free to ignore them and to ask any question you want. The 6 basic functions will be the following. Number 1, how do we redesign the world of enterprise, the world of work? Are we going to work until 70, 80 years old? How are we going to redesign governance of enterprise? And I think this is very important for the future. Who will take the decisions? Number 2, what is going to be the interface between technology and human beings? There is a lot of discussion today that robots, artificial intelligence, is going to replace people. Martin, Barry will tell us if this is true or not, but I think you can ask the question. Number 3, redesigning the world of energy, transport, climate, food, you name it. What's going to happen with all the kind of supply we need in an economy, and how we can redesign it in a way that it meets better with the needs of people. Number 4, the city of tomorrow, the smart city. How are we going to live better in a city? How are we going to be more mobile in a city? I'm sure that living in Bangkok, you are going to be interested about that. What are the examples around the world in terms of smart cities? For example, Toronto, where it is led by a company, Google, as an experiment. What about Barcelona, where it is actually led by the municipality and the people? What about Singapore, where it's government-led? What is the right model, and how should we apprehend that? We will discuss about education and values, because the world of tomorrow has to be operated by people, and they need to be prepared for this kind of environment. And finally, we are going to discuss health and aging. Are we going to live until 200 years old? Do we like it? What are we going to do until 200 years old? In what shape are we going to be? How are we going to redesign life? I know Barry will also address that. And what will be the impact on all of us? So basically, these are the type of issues that we are going to address. Again, we have had a preliminary discussion among ourselves. We want to give you the impression that we have made our homework, that it is structured. You are free to forget about it and ask anything you want. So let me start by my opening, my few remarks. Very briefly, I'm a professor of economics, and I always remember what Winston Churchill said one day, which I think is very topical to what we are going to say. He said, what we need in life is a need to forecast what is going to happen and the ability afterwards to explain why it did not happen. And I think this is, in economics, exactly what we are all about. I am full of envy to my colleagues, professor in another domain, which actually can say that in their field, they know more today about their own field than they used to know 50 years ago. If you are a professor of physics, you know about matters better than before. A professor of chemistry, a professor of biotechnology, a professor of you name it. They all have a better grasp of the knowledge they teach than before. There is one basic exception. It's economics. We know less today about economics than 30 years ago. Economics is perhaps about the measurement of our ignorance of the world around us. And I just want to give you an example of why this world is upside down economically. The United States of America is just going into the longest period of economic expansion in 145 years. And despite that, the central bank is reducing the interest rates. We are in a situation where the central banks have poured $14 trillion of money on the market, of liquidity, and we have no inflation. We are in a world where, in the US, again, this is the lowest level of unemployment in 45 years, and the wages are flat. They don't increase. We are in a world where the interest rates in many countries are turning negative yields. People are paying to lend money, and despite that, they continue to do it. We are in a world which, from an economic point of view, is totally upside down. Everything I told you now, if I would have said that to my professor at the university, I would have failed my exams. And you would have the privilege to have a quiet evening. So basically, we have to accept that the economic model is upside down. We have to accept also that the business model is upside down. Again, if you are looking at what is a sale, you look at the sale on the Oxford Dictionary, a sale is defined as the exchange of a commodity against money. But today, you have a lot of domains where actually you can sell something without money transaction. Look at Facebook. Look at the social network. You don't pay, it's free. Now you pay with your personal information, but there is no exchange of money. Second, there is a sale where there is not even an exchange of commodity, where you cannot buy the product, but you can only buy the use of the product. Take the streaming industry, Netflix, Spotify. Take Office 365 from Microsoft. You can buy the utilization of the product, but you cannot buy the product. You tell the company, I want to buy your product. They say, no. Go away, we won't sell the product. You can only use it. This is quite unique. We have never seen that before. We are in a world also where suddenly we start to see some of the most valuable companies in the world which are saying profit is not an objective anymore. And we have had a formidable statement. I want to make sure that I read the company well. This is a company called N26 in Germany, where the CEO has been saying, you know, actually profit is not one of our objectives. We have shareholders with deep pockets, and they're happy to finance us. And I told myself, the hell, if I would have met such shareholders before, my life would have been a lot easier. But if you are looking at the market, companies like WeWork, you know, which is lending office space, never made any money. Deliveroo, which is one of the most successful companies in terms of delivering food in England and Europe, just received $500 million from Amazon. Never made any money. If you are looking at Tesla, they never made any money in their life. Elon Musk wants to go on Mars. Well, he can stay there. But on the other side, they never made any money. And the big example was Amazon again, where Amazon, if you take away the cloud business of Amazon, all the rest is losing money. And despite that, at a certain stage, Amazon was worth $1 trillion. So we have to be thinking, what is the business model behind all that? And one of the reasons of this revolution is perhaps the technological industry that we are going to discuss about, which is putting everything upside down because technological companies today are running the show. And we have seen technological revolution in the past, and the big difference is that in the past, technology company would stay inside their domain of competence, core competency. IBM remain in computers, HP, DEC, and all those guys, computers. Today, some of the largest technological companies are going somewhere else. You see a company like Amazon going into retail food. You see Facebook and a company like Google going into digital advertising. You see a company like Tesla going into solar panels. You see, by the way, I'm Swiss. You see a company like Apple becoming last year the largest watch company in the world. Apple has produced last year 16 million watches. The entire Swiss industry is 24 million watches. Now, they're a bit more expensive. This is correct, but still, this is a detail. Huh? Oh, yeah, you're good. OK. So, by the way, we never thought this would happen. We never thought that this company would go also into traffic of payment. Like now, we have the project of Libra. Like we have a company in China which is called Ant Financial, which is the former Alipay. They go in traffic of payment, but they go also into insurance, mortgage, and they go also into wealth management. This is new. And the question for all of us is, where will be the competitors of tomorrow? Who will they be? And most probably the answer is that they are not going to be the one you think. They will come from another sector. And finally, what I would like to say as a conclusion, because I think I should show the example and not to go overboard in times, it will be a question of mindset. A question of mindset, of which type of mindset we are going to have, all of us, to face this kind of revolution. And 2 weeks ago, Sir Richard Attenborough, you know, the famous English guy who was looking at the animals around the world, who is 90-something, I think. He had a commission in front of the British Parliament, and he said, you know, the real issue about all that is not so much about legislation. It is much more about our consuming habits. How are we going to behave? And he says, you know, actually, the big difference is going to be between the older generation and the new one. Because the new generation is ready to change consuming habits very easily. You have seen in Sweden, you have Greta Thunberg, that's her name? Yeah. She went to the Davos Symposium at the early of the year, and she took the train. 23 hours of train. I am full admiration for her. But I tell you, the next time I go to Stockholm, I won't take the train. I'm too old. And I think this is exactly the big difference. How are we going to have generation-changing habits? How are we going to have part of the world which are also changing habits? There is 150 million Chinese friends which are taking the plane every year. 150 million. There are more than 20 companies in China which have connection overseas. Are we going to tell them to take the train? No. So we have to rethink not only technology, but we have to rethink our consuming habits. And I think this is going to be the various challenges that we are going to address tonight. And we are going to do it in a totally open way. We are going to do it as a conversation. And we are going to, actually, no. My two colleagues are going to bring you all the solutions. And to give you the solution about the world of tomorrow, redesigning the world of tomorrow, I'm going first to start with Martin, and then we will have Barry, and then we will open up the discussion if you agree. But at least this is what we are going to try to address for tonight. Are you okay? Good. So let's start with Martin. Actually, what is keeping you worried today?
Well, I'm not a worrying kind of guy.
You should.
Yeah, I know. But there are a couple of things that I'm missing in the conversation. And let me express them like this. I'm looking for the big stories in the enterprise. I work for an enormous enterprise, SAP. A friend of mine once said that, design is really hope made visible. So the question is, what do you hope for? And this is maybe why we're here, why we're so interested in the future. And I think that there's a very simple answer to that. Because everybody in this room, all our customers and the whole ecosystem we live in, we will spend the rest of our lives in the future. So the question is, who will design it for us? So what do we hope for there? And what are the mechanics of producing such a future? And I think one of the key drivers is imagination. Only with the power of imagination comes the power of shaping something. And we are great in shaping things. Are we also great in imagining and telling the stories of imagination? And that's very important, I think, because the future is important for us. I think it was Kierkegaard who said that life can only be understood backwards. Unfortunately, we live it forwards. So in this forward movement, we need to have these prospects, and they belong to us. We are the protagonists in our future stories. And these stories are exemplified by, as you said, Elon Musk and Branson and Bezos are going to the moon and to the Mars and everywhere. Why? What is happening out there? What's the story? We're seeing big investments in Mars One. We're seeing mining companies armed to the teeth to go out in space. I have a friend who told me that we will have vacation and 7-Elevens in our solar system. We're seeing a story we could call industrialization of space. Now, that may sound like science fiction to you, but I would rather ask you, how are you invested in the industrialization of space? If you're not directly, maybe your customers are. How are you acting on this story? It's fantastical, but it is happening yesterday. It's been happening for some years. That's the articulation. Now, another way of looking at these things from another perspective could be healthcare, which we'll discuss later.
Yes.
It takes a very long time to produce a decent doctor. And she takes maybe 7-8 years to get out there and be good for us. We have a shortage of doctors. Now, even if she is a great doctor, will she ever understand every illness you have ever had and every condition in every situation in your life? Will she ever understand every condition and situation of everybody in the Homo sapiens history? And then compare it to every piece of data and research that comes out every minute? Possibly not. But an AI can. And funny enough, an AI and her can even diagnose you better, sometimes 95 up to 100% correct. So computers and humans coming together in that sense. Just another perspective of these fantastical stories. Take nanotechnology. I held in my hand a little sensor 4 years ago. It was like a grain of rice, you could swallow it. It was a thermometer. It gave up your temperature out to the outer world. That was 5 years ago. Today, that thermometer plus little onboard computer and the Wi-Fi, obviously, and so on, is like a little bit more than a grain of sugar. Soon, it will be tiny, so you can actually put it in your coffee, many of them, hundreds of them, like sugar, and drink them. Soon, they will not only read the data from your body, they will implant data in your body. Because we have new insights in neurology and the science of knowledge, science of learning, science of remembering. So maybe we can drink a cup of coffee in the morning with the knowledge of Thai poetry and Kung Fu. However you want to use these two together in the morning. But this might be possible, yeah? What I'm saying is this. Never in the human history have the now been so temporary, so short. And we need to act on that. And that gives us questions about what should we know in the future? How should we tell our young members of the productive society that this is what you should know 20 years from now? The good answer to this, we have no idea. And this ignorance is great because that should feed our science. Science is built on ignorance. Oh, I don't know. How wonderful. Let's go and find out. And I think this is the proposition for the learning. And you touched upon that. Companies are giving up profit. And that's rightfully because profit is an effect of doing well and doing good. We have hierarchies controlling planning and, secrecy. I think we're moving towards purpose, networks, empowerment, and transparency to experiment together. These maybe are the values for the future. And now, just lastly, last 4 minutes here, what would be the mechanics to do it? We look at 3 horizons of change. First one is the one you know and love, and since you're here, you're really good at it. Deliver on the promise, the incremental innovation. Now, the second horizon, it's the adjacent innovation, where you can forecast, together with your ecosystem, your customers, where could we be next? There is a third horizon, though. It's the new. It's the vision and the thought leadership. And you're thinking, oh yeah, that's okay. We're good in forecasting and foresight. We can forecast even longer. And I tell you what, if you can forecast to the third horizon, it is not the third horizon by definition. That's the horizon of the unknown. You don't know the return on investment. You don't know the market pool. And worst of all, you don't know the technology and the math, how to reach there. But you know that the story it tells, the hope you bring and the imagination you have, it's very, very desirable. You can only backcast to the second horizon, where you trust your resources, your ecosystem, and you trust your vision. And this is what brings me to a question I've been being asked from Sony when I worked there, from Huawei in China, and now from SAP. Martin, can you write a strategy for us? I was thinking, okay, that seems easy for you, yeah? What will you build the strategy on, I ask back. And I say, no, strategy is first. And I said, yeah, what's the chicken and the egg? It's the both chicken and the egg? Yeah, it is. What's before strategy? Well, that's vision. That's the hope. First, we need to understand this world, and we heard a couple of ingredients of this future map, future fabric. This map, if you connect the dots in the map, the globalization, the blockchain, the rising young new talents from Asia, that give you the story. These stories give you futures, many possible futures. From these possible futures, these narratives, these stories, you should choose desirable futures. Not undesirable, obviously. From these futures, you need to stick your head out boldly and say, here's our purpose. These futures, we will deliver. We will play a significant positive role for them. Now you have a strategic point of view. Now you first can build a strategy, and then you can validate, incubate, and scale, and so on, the normal stuff. Schopenhauer said once, talent hits targets nobody can hit, which makes you a winner, right? Competitiveness. I'm a talent. I won the market. I won the customer. But he also said, genius hits the target nobody can see. And that's, for me, the essence of vision. What do you see? What did you hope for? What did you imagine? And then connect it to the future outlooks without knowing the solutions, the return of investment, and you boldly went for this future without fear. You played with this emergent future. The opposite to stability is not instability. It is evolution and emergence. So my last question is, why will you be relevant 10 years from now? How will you express it to us and share that so we can contribute to your relevance to be in this ecosystem? Eloquently, you must describe why will you be relevant 10 years from now? Because if you can't, you will not be. So I urge you to hope for something, to imagine something, and tell us. What did you hope for? That's my proposition.
Good. Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Congratulations. And in addition, you're on time. Fabulous. Barry.
Well.
Martin has given us a very inspiring statement of what we should hope for. So I will now give us a very depressing statement of what we should be afraid of. I think I'll start by reflecting a little bit on some of the paradoxes involved in the project that Martin laid out. It has never been more important that we project a positive vision of the future, and it has never been more difficult to do so, because the world that we are living in is in such a state of turbulence and flux that it is almost impossible to make a responsible prediction. So I take your point, Stephane, about you poor economists know less than you did 10 years ago. What about us philosophers? We're in even worse shape than that. It's at least arguable that the last 10 years have been the most transformative and disruptive decade in human history in terms of the number of profound platform changes that have taken place. And what that is saying to me is that the pace of change right now is expanding exponentially to such a degree that we simply can't get our arms around it, which is a terrifying prospect because the consequences of not doing so are potentially catastrophic. Okay. Stephane challenged us to think in terms of three issues that are keeping us awake at night. So let me tell you about some of the ones that are keeping me awake at night in this period of dramatic exponential transformation. First one that comes to mind is the rather terrifying prospect of the escalating US-China tensions. So I'm sorry to have to bring a political dimension into the discussion, but it's there. It's kind of the elephant in the room. President Trump, or the man who is occupying the White House, as some people prefer to put it, said famously, "Trade wars are easy to win." And as I read history, wars are not easy to win. If they were easy to win, there would only be winners. There would be no losers. And that is obviously not the history of warfare. So I am very, very concerned that as we witness what is probably the end of the American century, we have a country, we have a civilization that is in decline, and it is not going to decline peacefully, and the immediate future is going to be pretty ugly. I'm very, very worried about that. The upside of that is I sometimes fantasize what would happen if we put the positive energies of Western and Asian civilizations together, joined them behind some manner of common project instead of the negative competitiveness which we are experiencing. So history has not been very kind to notions of easy victories in conflict. And I think that we are in for some difficulties. I spend a fair amount of time in China, and a lot of my counterparts and colleagues there ask me, what is the immediate future of the American-Chinese rivalry? And my feeling is that it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. But I am holding on to some kind of Martin-esque optimism that it will get better. But that's going to take some work. So that's maybe number one. A second concern that I have has to do with the tension or the conflict or perhaps the contradiction between what we can call political transparency and political opacity. The opportunity for people to understand what decisions are being made by their governments, by the corporations that produce the products and the media channels that they depend on, and so on and so forth, and people who have no insight, or peoples who have no insight into how those things are actually happening. So we've got a paradox here as well, which is a very troubling one to me, and that is authoritarian, top-down nations have a capability of being extraordinarily efficient, even if we find the political organization to be unpalatable, distressing rather. And on the other side of the coin, societies that have vibrant, functioning democracies can experience a complete paralysis. I happen to live in such a country myself, the United States. So we pride ourselves on a vibrant, open discussion, and we can't get a damn thing done. Even in the wake of, as you probably know, an epidemic of mass shootings. 150 people have died in international terrorism attacks in the United States. Tens of thousands of people have died in shootings. And when we look at the epidemic of violence, it's a really strange thing. Each of the incidents that has traumatized us as a society is different from all of the others except in one feature. Every single one of the mass shootings that we've seen has involved guns. And that sounds like a pretty obvious thing to say. It apparently has not sunk into our political culture and our political leadership. We cannot move on that simple, obvious fact. So there are all kinds of things that seem to give evidence to the distressing contradiction between top-down authoritarian leadership structures in which political decision-making is made behind closed doors in a manner that is opaque and that can get things done, and democratic, vibrant, open discussions in which almost nothing seems to get done. My favorite example of that, you won't believe this. I live in California. In 1997, 22 years ago, we passed legislation in California to study high-speed rail. And in those 22 years, we have built 50 miles of experimental high-speed rail. In the last 5 years, China has built 16,000 miles of high-speed rail. What does that tell us? I'm not sure, but there are profound lessons that I think we need to examine in a very introspective way. I hope you don't misunderstand that as an argument for authoritarian, top-down, opaque leadership. That is clearly not my intention, but there is something that we have to deal with. Third and final commentary that I have is that I lie awake at night worrying about the conflict, the tension, or the contradiction between personal autonomy, which we value so highly in the West, and a commitment to the common good, which requires the sacrificing of personal initiative, of personal privacy, of personal autonomy, of a willingness to hop on an airplane anytime you want to and expend a massive amount of carbon energy in doing so. So we are wired to think in the short term about immediate individual gratification. And we're in a situation right now, globally speaking, in which we can't afford to do that any longer. The consequences of our continuing to indulge immediate short-term desirable goods and long-term sacrifices in order to ensure the common good has become an immediate source of extreme tension in our world. So we have in the West, at any rate, because I don't feel that I have the authority to speak about Thailand, this is what I'd love to hear from you. We have basically an epidemic of urban violence which is related to people's belief in their individual right to own guns, to behave in whatever way they like. We have a medical epidemic in a strict epidemiological sense of pediatric obesity, in the United States. The default assumption when you take your 4 or 5 or 6-year-old child to the pediatrician is that the kid will be severely overweight. They start with that as an assumption. Why? It has to do with the constant propaganda that, yes, we know what is healthy, we know what is not healthy, but more important than either of those things is your right to choose. Choose to smoke, choose to eat high-fat foods, high-sugar foods, choose to own a gun, choose to drive an expensive, fuel-inefficient vehicle, so on and so forth. We could continue those sorts of examples endlessly. So the final thing that I would probably want to say is that each of these 3 vectors is both vertical and horizontal. Each of them cuts across all of the domains that we will be discussing in the course of this symposium. So I think I will end it there and let us have at it. So with the positive message of Martin, with the total downer of me, sorry about that, Stephane, would you please take over?
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you very much, Barry. All right, there was something in common with both of you is to look at the long-term perspective, right? However, John Maynard Keynes said one day, the problem is that in the long term, we are all dead. So basically, what is the purpose of a company there? I mean, on one hand, the company has to deliver short-term results. On the other hand, it has to prepare a long-term vision, if I follow you, Martin. How do you balance the two?
I would say, I'm back at the 3 horizons.
Yeah.
We usually think, this is a great question. I think this is a question everybody in the room should struggle with a little bit. And I take Amazon as an example. We talk about it in Switzerland at IMD with some of the professors, your colleagues. It's back to the story. Amazon makes some money just the last 3 years, also from a part of their... Now, what kept them rich to invest in futures is a story. And there's 2 things to their story. It's been extremely positive and relevant. So relevance in an ecosystem. Why are you relevant 10 years from now? They thought about it. Number 2, they've been consistent with the same story over and over again. And we have numbers today that say, if you keep your story intact, your long-term manifesto, your myth, if you wish, you will get attention from the market. You might not get it from the next quarter, the reactive market, but the guys that are there to make the real bucks, the real money, they will stick to you. Now, the 3 horizons are beautifully connected to each other. Do not make the mistake to think that they are sequential. Oh, we will make a couple of quarters or a couple of years that are really good. We will repair the house. And then we will start with your next horizon, Martin. We will call you then to forecast to a next future. And maybe then we will make some new visions. No, they're included in each other. They're a little bit like bubbles included in each other. If you're doing something wrong in the first 3 quarters you plan for, you're doing something wrong for your long-term future as well. Yeah?
Okay. Thank you, Martin. I let you think about questions, right? I am going to ask another question to Barry, but in between you can start reflecting. Barry, you mentioned the escalating tension between the US and China, which basically, I mean, protectionism is not new. We have that in the past. In the past, it was linked to job protection. Today, protectionist measures are linked to national security. The United States of America is using the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, saying, I protect my market because there is a danger of national security. And this makes it difficult for everybody to try to define what is a national security concern of the US, of China, and the rest. So we are in a totally different paradigm as in the past, and the government can tell you, okay, don't work with Huawei because this is a national security issue. You know, what can you argue with that? So my question to you, now we have a big tension between the US and China. China answers this tension by escalating the war on currency devaluation.
Yeah. For
the first time, we have seen the yuan going under the $7 mark. I think you are at 30 baht something with the dollars. how do you see it finishing, this war between the US and China? Will it finish, or is it just the beginning of something?
It's not the beginning, but it's also not the end.
You should be a politician.
No, I mean, I'm depressed enough as it is. I mean, don't make it worse for me. I am looking at this situation in civilizational terms. So I don't really think about it in terms of currency devaluations and trade deficits, all of which are real. I'm thinking of it much more in terms of the seeming inevitability of the continued rise of China. This will have global consequences. I'm sure you're already experiencing it profoundly in Thailand. We're entering into an Asian century. We simply are. This is an enormous opportunity for Thailand, but it also confronts us with enormous peril. So what mostly worries me in this regard is we don't have a good history of powerful countries ending their dominance, ending their hegemony gracefully. So my great fear is that the United States, under the either the pretext or the very real concern about the sorts of national security issues that we are facing, and I've done work with Huawei, so I know a little bit about this, it will escalate from an economic rivalry into something far more physically dangerous.
Okay.
So I have to register that with some concern, and I just did.
So. Thank you very much. Technology, human interface, Martin, everybody is worried that artificial intelligence, robotics is going to kill the jobs. Should we be worried or not?
Not worried.
Good.
Worried?
That's my, no, okay. look, guys, again, there's a lot of dystopias out there. Yeah, one is sitting there, of course, yeah. Now, Hollywood have a monopoly on dystopias, and they're doing it so well. I mean, I ask you to articulate your own future, why you're relevant. They are articulating it so well, so we think it's happening. So we don't have to do it for them. They do the job to 99%. Now, what we need to articulate is utopias. In between, we call it something that we coined at the SAP, we call it the do-topia. You need to do, deliver, discuss, all these things. And one thing we have imagined there is something we call human and machine, the empathic symbiosis. Why would you want to have anything else? So if you ask me if that's going to take our jobs, no, it will definitely do some subhuman tasks, hopefully all of them in the future. So I see that in automation. So we can focus on something that are superhuman tasks. So there's 4 A's to this play. The first A, automation.
Yeah.
That will be machines doing the subhuman tasks, so we can go into much more valuable, also monetarily, productivity of human ingenuity. It's a symbiosis between machine intelligence, human ingenuity. The second A is autonomy. Then we sit together, and we have circles of interest, and we autonomously can trade valuable information. The third one, I already mentioned, augmentation. Once we have time to do something else, that something else will be of higher value, the augmented value. And in the end, we reach something that is abundance of intellectual property, where you know stuff, I know stuff. We don't compete, and we can probably argue about that, because that's your topic, I know, I'm stepping in there. But we can complete. We have complementary skills that we can bring together to the table, because we do have technology that bring that together. I hope that makes sense. So these 4 A's will give us a new, fantastic future.
Obviously, Barry, you disagree.
Well, I don't disagree as much as you might think, but I disagree a little bit. We are in a formative stage in several key technologies. I think it's clear they are artificial intelligence, robotics, and biotechnology. There are others, but those are the ones that have most captured my attention. And in each case, I think that we need to think about ourselves as being at a very significant nodal point or inflection point in which none of the outcomes that Martin predicts is guaranteed. They are all possible. And it's really up to us at this point, before it is too late, to be able to seize upon the positive opportunities that are being created by your 4 A's in each of these domains, AI, machine learning, robotics, biotech, before it is too late. Because they are moving very, very rapidly and escalating very, very quickly. And we know you cannot put the technological genie back in the bottle once it is out. So there will be winners and losers in the AI revolution, and that revolution is happening in our own lifetimes, I mean, in real time in this decade. And we have to do a couple of things. One is be prepared to take up the consequences of the people who are going to be casualties. So with those dehumanizing jobs that are lost, people are performing them and they are making a living doing so. And it's not enough to say, well, we don't need to worry about doing mindless, repetitive, physical, or even intellectual labor anymore. That's great, but what if you are a travel agent? What if you are a bank clerk? What if you were a lawyer? Lawyers, well, never mind.
Okay, I'm glad you didn't mention professors. That's a very good point. Thank you very much indeed. I think I've seen the message, there are some questions in the audience. So who will send me a message? Here we are, the chairman of TMA, come on.
We do have a microphone?
Yeah, the microphone is coming.
I'm really disappointed,
Please.
Stephane, that you asked us such easy questions.
Don't worry, the difficult ones are coming.
Yeah, with all of these changes and difficulties, I think companies need to adjust themselves, need to either transform or change themselves. And to my belief, it is always start with the leaders. So the leaders themselves need to change.
Yeah.
To allow the company, in the end, to change. So what the key issues that leaders of the future need to tackle onto themselves so that they can lead the company into the futures.
Thank you very much. You have only one answer possible, because otherwise we can spend a lot of time on this one. If you would take one quality of a leader, take one, what would it be?
Vision.
Vision.
And articulation, good, steadfast articulation of that vision over and over again.
Yeah, you have to walk the talk.
Yes.
Right?
Mine would be the ability to identify and cultivate talent. I think that that's going to prove to be the most important asset in any organization going forward.
Thank you. Let's move now to, we had a big chunk, which is energy, transportation, climate, food, I mean, whatever you want into it. Let me go on energy and technology. Yesterday, you mentioned those well, Andrea, that you had this famous discussion, not it was discussion, you know, this famous game between the world champion of Go and Google Mind, and he lost. But what we don't speak about in terms of technology, that technology today is using an enormous amount of energy. If you are looking at this match, the Google Mind computer was consuming 440 kilowatt an hour. The human being in front of him, his brain is 20 watt an hour. Okay. So our brain's 20 watt an hour. Now, some people are making also saving on that one, but that's another story. So basically, actually, we are not solving the problem of energy when we are using more technology, because some people say, you know, take a car full of technology. It takes a lot of energy to produce it, a lot of energy to move the technology, a lot of energy to make, you know, with all the material inside, you know, the famous 17 rare material. So how would you answer when people are saying that actually technology is consuming a lot of energy?
Well,
what would you say?
I take my side, this side. What I've seen, I saw this 3 years ago, was the first transparent solar cell. And it's amazing. I also saw the first transparent aluminum, the metal that otherwise is known not to be so transparent. What does that mean for construction, engineering, architectures and cities and energy harvesting? The other year, I saw for the first time a film thin as tape. So basically, I could tape my glasses around here. These glasses will be technology consumers and energy consumers soon. I put them on, they are self-sufficient because this tape will harvest enough energy. I think there will be a nice little uphill first, and then a large dip in the energy consumption that is needed to be produced by the normal utilities. And the energy consumption by these electronics will go down. There will be a crosshair thing. And in the end, I see nothing else that energy will be for free. Actually, I would tell to anybody in energy business today, 20 years from now, please find a new business model. Energy will be for free.
Barry, first, would you agree with that? And second, you know, you have the forecast is that in 20 years from now, 82% of the total primary energy production will still be coal, gas, and oil, right?
Yeah.
So about less than 20% will be renewables. My question to you, because I know you are a climate protection addict.
I worry about that too.
You worry. We all will worry. We don't know what to do about it, but we worry, which is already something. So basically, how do you see the future in this respect? We still need, in one way, the energy. On the other hand, we have this climate problem. How are we going to balance the two? What are we going to do?
You know, one of the areas of real optimism is I've seen a number of projects. We at IDEO have worked on a few of them, which are ultimately about creating greater transparency in how we use energy and how we use materials and what are the consequences. So in the past, you wanted to go somewhere, you hopped in your car, you drove there, you got out, you did what you want to do, you drove back. And we have begun to create feedback mechanisms in our automobiles, just to give you one kind of banal example, which are telling us in real time along the way what the consequences of our driving habits are. It's a kind of biofeedback, in a way, with cars. And I think that what we really need rather urgently is this kind of transparency of information made available to individual consumers on an ongoing basis of how they are using energy and what is the consequence of their energy usage. So, you know, the automobile is the most conspicuous example. It spends 95% of its lifetime sitting out in front of your house doing absolutely nothing. Most of the cost of an automobile happens before anybody even buys it. It's in the production and the transportation to the end user, up to 60% according to some estimates. If we knew that information, we would be in a better position to be able to regulate our behaviors responsibly. And in that respect, it's actually grounds for considerable optimism.
Thank you. I mean, it leads us to the city in which we are going to live in the future. It's fine to share all the information. What about our life privacy? What about mobility in the city? Because, I mean, even if you have autonomous cars, they will still be blocked in a traffic jam. There will be nobody inside, but it will be blocked. So how would you design the city of the future? What would you do if suddenly I tell you, okay, Martin, you are in charge of Bangkok?
Wow.
Good luck.
Thank you.
What do you do?
Let's see. I will ask this crowd first. Well, let's take it from the backcasting perspective, because we're forecasting too easy. We are biased to forecast. A backcasting scenario could be this. I'm talking to Saudi Arabia, of all folks, and they tried to build a city called Neom, out of nothing, out in the desert, the biggest city on the planet. And I told them this, guys, your citizens, the innovators, all the bright minds you want to collect, and all these people, the citizens, the autonomy of these people is already there. These people probably already exist, many of them. How do you connect them together virtually as citizens of an idea rather than a physical entity? That's one thing. Second, I'm looking towards the de-urbanization. We all say the forecasting says, you probably know the numbers much better than me. What is it, 85% of...
4.2 billion people in the year 2030 will be living in a city.
Crazy. But it's forecasting, if you forecast that's true, how about this? With new ways of working virtually and meeting virtually, addressing a problem together with new means and technologies, and new ways to transport ourselves in 3 and 4 and whatever dimensions, fourth would be the virtual dimension, we might move out from the cities for a better life and quality, and cities will breathe more. The energy consumption will not be the same wasted, but will be directed to a purpose. So a de-urbanization might be a backcasting future.
Very good. Barry, you're in charge of Bangkok. What do you do?
Boy. One of the things that we are very much aware of is the automobile industry has been selling cars for the last 115 years. And they mostly recognize today that they do not have another 115 years of selling cars in front of them. So we've hit an inflection point in the automobile industry. The cities have not caught up with that realization. Most of the auto manufacturers actually understand it. Cars have gotten much, much safer, but partly as a consequence, they have also gotten much more expensive. And they're a tremendous drain. So the auto industry is beginning to recognize that they are going to have to undergo a fairly massive shift in their fundamental business propositions if they are going to survive. So I think we should not be anticipating a world all of a sudden in which the occupants of a car will all be sitting in the back seat sleeping or reading the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal while the car autonomously moves by itself. The immediate future of autonomous vehicles will probably not be the private car. Mm-hmm. It'll probably be some manner of efficient mass transit, publicly shared mobility across cities. So I've experienced a little bit of the wonders of traffic in Bangkok. I can't give you the numbers, of course, but I can tell you in the United States, typical Americans spend about 48 hours per year sitting motionless in their cars in traffic. You're an economist. How much is that costing us in productivity, in medical consequences?
As an economist, I would say how much missed opportunity you have by having this captive audience in a car to which, I'm surprised nobody is advertising to those people, through TV sets, etc. They are projects by Ford.
Or
in
creating
this respect.
Opportunities to make that time more productive.
Exactly, to make that time more productive. By the way, how would you see, by the way, is there any question from the audience? If you have, raise your hand. Madam Ambassador. No problem whatsoever.
We handle everything up here.
Thank you so much. My name is Satu Suikari-Klev, and I'm ambassador of Finland to
yeah.
Thailand and Cambodia.
Okay.
I was so glad that you touched upon climate change, but I would like to dig a little bit deeper into that.
Yes.
Because listening to both of you make me really think. First after you talk about the visions and what is your wish for the future, I started to think, what is mine? And then after you talked about the scary scenarios, I started to think, what is my scary scenario? And there is no doubt in my mind that my wish number one for the future is that we will have a habitable globe in 2100. And the number one scare in my mind is that we will not have a habitable globe in some decades time. I was very glad to recognize that there was some optimism in what you talked about. But first, I wanted to ask both of you, because you are visionaries of the future, will we have a habitable globe, 2100?
Will we have what?
A globe that is habitable for humans still.
In what period of time? When?
2100, for instance.
Oh, okay, so we won't be there anymore.
I was going to say 2050, but I don't want to be that pessimistic.
2100 is a good horizon.
I want to be that pessimistic to put it in 30 years.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ambassador.
And if you think that is still the case, we are not yet extinct, What do we need to do today?
Yeah.
Just one thing. I mean, you already talked about
one thing.
But one more thing from both of you. How do we get there? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ambassador. So one thing first, are we going to be there in 2100? At least you, maybe me also, of course. What are you going to be there? Number one question, because this will lead us well. And number two, one action, right? One thing you would propose.
No, great, and maybe the most difficult question. In my future spectrum, I assume that's a choice, by the way. Future is a verb. It's not a noun. Future is a moving thing. Futuring, to do futures. Yeah. So I choose the 9-10 billion people living together there. Yes. What to start to do now? Well, describe the relationships we will have between us and the planet. Put them down and start to do the utopia. If that's the utopia, what should we do to get there? That's the first thing we need to do. We're lacking the prerequisite to even start the engineering for that, the articulation of that future.
Thank you. Barry, will you be there in 2100?
Absolutely.
Good. In what shape?
I won't have
great shape.
Great shape.
I won't have as much hair.
And one action you would propose?
I would, if I can put the answer in kind of direct response to the question, which I think is a very profound one. I do think that the human beings have some extraordinary capability to adapt. Maybe that's a problem. Maybe that's where the problem lies. But I'm pretty sure that we will be here as a species in another 100 years. The concern, of course, is that we are doing irreversible damage. And what the climate scientists are saying privately amongst themselves, and not so much to the public because it's a paralyzing fear, is raising the question, are we now moving from the possibility of offsetting climate change to one in which we are simply going to adapt to the inevitable? I think we lost 1 billion tons of ice in Greenland yesterday. Okay, so I think that if I were to do one thing, I will wave my magic wand and command the world to rethink the nature of personal fulfillment and whether it has to be through consumption or whether there could not be some more environmentally benign way of making us feel like valued individuals in our world.
Very good. Thank you very much. So I assume that most of us, we will be there in 2100, right? Now the question is, can we afford it? I mean, if we assume that we will have a very old population, that the world population is going to cap at about 10 billion people, which is the forecast of the UN, that 50% of the health costs are being done during the 5 last years of an individual. Actually, and I start with you, Martin, I mean, when we have an aging society, because this is what it is all about, can we afford the cost of it? Up to where should we afford it? Because we have a lot of good wishes, better health, better environment, better this, better that. How do we pay for it?
Yeah. Another of the big ones, yeah?
Yeah, you
only
do
easy
whatever
questions.
you want.
Only easy questions tonight. That's great. Well, yes, we will live much longer. 200, 300, 400 years. That's possible. That's not predictable, it's possible. Now, I believe that we'll be healthy and productive during these years.
Good.
I also believe that we will find new values. I mean, Barry, there was a wonderful answer to your deep question there. Let's find new values. They don't have to be monetary. I'm looking for this completion again. Imagine this, that the educational system shifts a gear into who are you and who are you becoming. Yeah? I'm not trying to be philosophical or Hegelian here. Becoming is a much better value than being. So we will change our value to the ecosystem and each other to complement until completion. Then we will move on. Again, this will be, and that will create new value through whatever monetary exchange, taxes to start with. And I lived in Sweden for 25 years. I love taxes. You should do that too.
You didn't have the choice.
Yes. Well, and somehow biased, maybe, yes. We will exchange values that we don't see as values today. Teach each other. Exchange language, knowledge, for example, and so on. We will have hundreds of thousands of small tasks that will attach to other tasks rather than 1 or 3 occupations per lifetime. And this enormous superhuman value rather than repetitive task 200 years from now, because this is what you're asking actually,
yes,
will be totally a different thing. We will have a very different social construct and contract with each other, and that will create value, yes.
Barry, in this context, I just have a question. In this context, we live 200 years old, right? How many years will we be working on these 200 years? Are we going to work 150 years? That's terrifying. So what is your answer?
It's terrifying if if the nature of the work is not fulfilling.
Yes.
Okay, good answer.
It's very optimistic if we are doing, you know, here's a real paradox. We are happiest when we are doing things that any animal could do, eating, drinking, sleeping, having sex, and we tend to be most miserable when we're doing what only human beings can do, namely work. That's backwards, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I do look forward to a future in which more of the work that we do is meaningful and rewarding. But it's not so easy, and this, you know, the whole question of longevity and even immortality, we understand so little about the mechanisms of life that it's an extremely difficult proposition. I can tell you a little anecdote, if I may. A friend of mine gave a presentation that I was able to attend to a group of medical and pharmaceutical professionals. And he started out by asking how many people in the audience, of the people in the audience, how much do we understand of what goes on inside a microchip? And the consensus was probably, you know, something in the area between 50% and 80%. And then he moved it to how much do we understand of what goes on inside a living cell? Who thinks 90%? And everybody in the audience laughed. Who thinks 50%? And when it got down to 2 or 3%, pretty much everybody in the audience raised their hand. So the mysteries of life are so profound that it seems to me very, very risky to project forward to what life will be like at the age of 200.
Martin?
That's a wonderful answer. And with the neurology and CRISPR-Cas9 and these technologies, we are getting there, quantum mechanics and so on, deep physics. I would like to come back to the word work.
Yes.
Because you nailed it. And I've been thinking about how long have we had these two words, work, in human history, and future. The history of the future is very short. The history of work as well. Maybe we got the word work when we started to moving from hunter-gatherers to agriculture, and you know, the wheat domesticated us, the potatoes domesticated the human rather than vice versa. And that was miserable. We're still there with Excel spreadsheets, you know. Someone said, you know, the real job is not adjusting margins in your Word document. It's writing a love letter, your new contract, your white paper. And I think the word work will disappear and be laughed at. We will find meaning, meaningfulness, fulfillment in sort of a hunting and gathering for intellectual transcendence, personal, emotional transcendence between each other. We will forget what work is. So the 300 years of whatever we will call that in the future, being human, I guess, well, I don't think we've been human yet. I'm looking forward to it.
I have to give you a linguistic input. In French, work is called travail.
Travail.
Travail. The origin of the word travail is in Latin trepilium, which is a torture instrument.
Sorry.
So I agree with you, we have to reinvent the name, because you tell every French travail has torture in his mind. that does explain a lot of things happening in the country. Okay.
And you know, in English, travails are sources of misery and unhappiness.
Yes, exactly. So this is the issue. Maybe is there any question? Yes, sir.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm sure the panelists have seen the film Minority Report, where the protagonist is Tom Cruise, who works for a unit in the police department, Group 3 crime. Now, what I've read recently is that the Chinese government has successfully implemented the social scoring, and more than that is they've actually trained machine learning on faces of prisoners, as well as mannerisms. And they claim, what's scary about this is they claim that the accuracy is approaching 95%. Now, my question is, will technology infringe on human rights? And what is the trade-off? If it becomes accurate, then is it worth the trade-off of losing one's human rights for the prosperity of society as a whole?
Thank you. It's a very basic question, and I think let me start with Martin and then Barry. Or is that all right? Fine. I mean, basically, this kind of interconnected world, is it a world of more freedom or less freedom? Are we going to live better, or is it going to be terrible?
Man, you're coming with easy questions tonight. Yes, I have at least an outlook for that. I have a friend in Sweden, he did this. He bought this Whiting scale. So every morning he goes on scale, okay, I need to lose 5 kilos. This scale tweets out on Twitter his weight. And his friends told him, what are you doing? This is private information. He said, yeah, come on, I want your help. If I go down 500 grams, I want applause. If I go up 1 kilo, I want you to tell me so. Yeah? And then the storm died out. Long story short, he started to tweet everything. In the end, his bank account. Yep. And in Sweden, you can know what people make because you can go to the tax authorities and get that. The storm died out after 2 weeks. Now when we know, we don't care. Yeah? So it's one perspective on it. We need to change our behavior or mindset towards transparency. What's important in life? Second is this, back to China. I see this pyramid. Information is useless. It's like potatoes in the ground. They will just rot. You need to design it to become, so data is useless to become information. Information to become knowledge, and knowledge to become wisdom. In products, you have, features that become products, become services. The services between us, the relevance of the data I gave you must come directly to me. Now we have a relationships. And I say, design the relationships we will have. The rest will follow. What China is doing, they haven't thought about the relationships they are creating. They are only thinking about the service and the transaction for their one-part benefit. Bring all the parties to the table, design the relationships and the benefit, immediate benefit, and I give you my data.
Thank you. Barry, one question related to that. Is there still a possibility in this world to keep something confidential?
Oh, no, that's over.
It's over?
Yeah, forget that.
You mean the Swiss banking secrecy is over?
Except for the Swiss banking.
Go ahead. So there is no confidentiality anymore?
It's a really interesting question, and it's one that I'm glad that you raised it. I think about it a lot. Partly because I have ongoing conversations with colleagues and counterparts in China. To use an example, I was in the cafeteria of Lenovo in Beijing a couple of weeks ago, and I paid for my lunch with a facial scan.
Yeah,
which was
intense.
in some respects terrifying. The real question seems to me, how much privacy are we willing to give up for how much security? So I tell my Chinese friends, I can't understand how you can tolerate the state knowing where you are at any given moment, what you are reading, who you are talking to, and what you are purchasing. And they respond to me and say, I don't understand how you in America can tolerate unacceptable levels of urban violence, the unequal distribution of social resources, and a variety of other things. that are related to this question of centralization versus decentralization of control. So it's, I don't think it's an either or. It's fundamentally a question of how much privacy are we willing to give up for how much security.
Yeah.
In China, as you probably know, you will see young women walking alone late at night from work to home. You'll never see that in an American city. They know better. It's simply far too dangerous.
Thank you. Before we get to the last subject, is there any other question in the audience? I don't want to miss anybody. Okay, let's move to the last issue because I think it's a big concern in Thailand, and it's education. Basically, and I start with you, Martin, in this type of world, what would you tell, because I'm being asked the question all the time, so for this time I'm being the one asking it. You take a young person, 12 years old, and you say, okay, will you adapt? What kind of education should you have? What should you learn in order to confront this brave new world and to be happy?
Yes. First, question everything. Question the status quo. Question your professor.
Even at school?
Yes. Do it. You know, being right doesn't come from experience. It's coming from being right. And you might find someone else that is younger or less experienced being right. So be that curious. Associate your ideas. So go and find people out there, like people here, to ask, hey, I thought about it. What do you think? Let them rip you apart in your, and be prepared to listen. Experiment. Teach yourself and learn to always experiment. And when you thought you know how to do it, you need to start over again. Because again, you must, human being is not a thing, is a verb, is an action. You are becoming something. So ask yourself, what am I becoming today? Back to observation, listening, to networking, association of your ideas with others, and question everything. Be always on the move.
Question, listen, correct? Also?
Question, associate, experiment, observe, and network. Okay. There's a great book about it called Innovator's DNA by Clayton Christensen. And this is the traits of an innovator. For me, these are the traits of a curious human that seeks purpose.
I'm going to give you the full Barry. Just one thing. One day I was chairing at the Davos annual meeting a session with Ken Olsen, which used to be the chairman and founder of a computer company called Digital Equipment, DEC. Some may remember this company. Sure. And I asked him, what is the advice you would give to the CEO in the audience? Answer, go more often to church. I said, what the hell? I said, why? He told me, because this is the only place where those CEOs have to sit down, listen, and shut up.
There you go.
And I think there is a virtue of speaking. There is a virtue in listening also. Asia also is a country, since you like very much the Asian culture, where people can listen also. Barry?
We are telling our students now that they should expect 7 careers over the course of their working lives. Not if they're going to live to be 200 or 300, but even a normal lifespan. That does not mean 7 promotions and then you retire, which is the story of my father. It means 7 fundamentally different careers over the course of your life. So what that tells me is that the importance of flexibility, adaptability, creativity are probably more important than developing a single, deep, even technical skill set. At IDEO, the design consultancy that I work with, we like to talk about T-shaped individuals. Yes. I don't think that Thai has the letter T, but what we mean by that is just the physical. The vertical shaft of the letter T indicates deep technical knowledge. We need to be able to rely on somebody who is a mechanical engineer or a graphic designer or a design researcher to have a mastery of that skill. But then we also emphasize the horizontal shaft in the T, and that is the disposition to look over the cubicle into what somebody else is doing because you're curious about it and you want to learn from it and contribute to it. But there's something even more important than that kind of curiosity. That horizontality, that curiosity about what else is going on in the world outside of your field of expertise, it's a kind of an insurance policy against the obsolescence of what you know now. Because what is important now, technically speaking, will be less important in 10 years and may not even exist in 20.
Thank you, Barry. We reached the conclusion. I have one question for each of you, which is exactly the same one. Assume you are the political leader in your country, choose whatever country you want, Martin, and you have the choice of one action that you would do immediately. What would it be?
I'm coming back to that. Imagine a future we all want to live in. Very, very hard, but you need to start somewhere. Put it down, go discuss.
You discuss it, or you tell to people, this is what I propose, do you agree?
No, you discuss. We need to listen again. We need to play with ideas. We need to ask questions about ideas. There's nothing to ask about because there's nothing on the table.
You are not afraid you are going to have a high level of cacophonia, confusion, everybody having plenty of ideas, and then you have to synthesize everything?
Yeah, that's a good worry. I'm not worried because humans by nature are a huge jazz orchestra that goes free from. That's okay. Let us be human.
Okay. You know that there is this big test that you do. It was done by a guy of MIT where they say you all clap your hands, you start whenever you want, and after 3 minutes, everybody is synchronized after 30 seconds. You know that? So at the end of the day, we may agree on something. It's possible.
It's emergent and evolutionary rather than planned.
Okay, very good. Very.
Well, if I became the leader of my country, I would...
Not necessarily yours, but any country, what would you do? Because yours, I think I suspect what you would do, but go ahead.
So first he got Bangkok, now he gets a country.
I'll surprise you. I would organize a national power failure so that nobody could look at their screens for 24 hours. And I think it would be fundamentally transformative of everything.
You know, Barry, I think that the president of Venezuela is trying that regularly. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you will agree it was a most stimulating discussion, and I would like to thank Martin. Barry.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you very much.
I need to thank you for such stimulating and challenging questions also.
We covered the whole universe.